Konnichiwa! I'm Alex with Lexco Moto Gymkhana and welcome back for another video in my Moto Gymkhana setup series lessons. Now, in this video and in the next few videos, we are going to be addressing the topic of how our engine delivers power. Now, in Moto Gymkhana, we want our motorcycle to accelerate very quickly and very smoothly. And we also want our motorcycle to provide us with very smooth engine braking. We don't want super abrupt engine braking. We also want our throttle to feel very smooth and very direct. And when we transition from on and off the throttle, we want that transition to be very smooth and very predictable. Now, one of the most common questions that I get about Moto Gymkhana riding is how do you keep the RPMs up when making a tight Moto Gymkhana style U-turn? How do you keep the RPMs up? How do you keep the engine from lugging? Well, we're going to be addressing all of these topics in the next few videos. And in this video, we're going to start by talking about adjusting our idle rate. Now, before we talk about what idle rate is and how to adjust it, first we need to talk about power band. Now, what is power band? Power band is simply the area in the rev range where your motorcycle is going to make the best power. And this power band is going to be different on different types of motorcycles. All right. Some motorcycles like cruiser style bikes are going to have their power bands lower in the rev range. They make a lot of low end power. But once you start accelerating up to a certain point higher in the rev range, the engine will keep getting louder and then it'll work harder, but you're not accelerating any faster anymore because you're out of the power band, you're too high. Conversely, we have motorcycles like super sport bikes where they make their best power higher up in the rev range. So at first it's accelerating okay, but then you get to a certain point higher in the rev range where it starts accelerating much more aggressively. That's because they have higher power bands. Now, where the power band is at is going to depend on multiple factors. How many cylinders your bike has, the configuration of those cylinders. Is it a parallel twin, V-twin, single, inline 4, V4? There's many different types of engines. It's also going to depend on the way the bike was tuned from the factory. And another factor that could affect power band is our gearing. Now, the power band is also going to be affected by the gear that you are riding in. So if you're in first gear, for example, those gears, usually the power band is going to be lower. And as you go to higher gears, the power band is going to be a little bit higher. I'm oversimplifying here, but that's generally how it works. And when we keep our RPMs in the power band, our engine is going to accelerate better. It's going to accelerate more smoothly, and our throttle is going to feel more direct and more seamless. Now, during Moto Gymkhana specifically, one of the problems we can run into is that if we're making a tight U-turn and our RPMs drop below the power band, what we're going to experience is lugging of the engine, that chugging sensation, which could cause us to stall the bike and fall over. But even if you don't stall and fall over and you do make it around the U-turn, because the RPMs are so low, you're not going to have any acceleration and drive coming out of the U-turn. Now, this is not a big problem if you are using clutch during your riding, but if you are attempting to use Moto Gymkhana clutch-less style, we can prevent these issues by adjusting our idle rate. Now, idle rate simply refers to where the motorcycle's RPMs are sitting at when we have no throttle on. So I want you to think about sitting on your motorcycle. You turn on the bike, it's in neutral, hands off the grips, no throttle open, and the RPMs are going to be sitting at a certain spot. That's your idle rate. Now, every motorcycle has a recommended idle rate that comes from the manufacturer, and you can usually find that information in your owner's manual. But the problem here is that the factory recommended idle rate is usually not high enough for Moto Gymkhana purposes. So what we can do is we can raise that idle rate a little bit That's going to keep our RPMs up even when we have the throttle closed when we're rounding a cone. This is going to allow us to avoid all those negative problems. It's going to help keep our RPMs up so we don't lug, and we're going to have better acceleration and drive when exiting a U-turn. Now, how exactly do we adjust the idle rate? Unfortunately, for some people, some idle rates can only be adjusted by going into the ECU of the motorcycle and doing it electronically. That happens to be the case for me with my R1200 GS. But fortunately for many of us, we do have motorcycles where the idle rate can be adjusted by the idle rate screw. Now, some idle rate screws are pretty easy to access. Others are very deep inside the motorcycle, and there sometimes are aftermarket components, idle rate screw extenders that will make the screw a little bit more accessible so you can get to it more easily. Now, fortunately for me, on Kawasaki's, which my Ninja 300 and my KLX are both Kawasaki's, Kawasaki makes the idle rate screw very, very accessible. The way that I would find it is I would just go below the gas tank on the lower left side, and there was a little black screw over by where the cables pulled the throttle butterfly valve in the throttle body. All I would have to do is twist that screw and just watch the RPMs go up, and I would set it to my desired idle rate. All right, so our next question is, where exactly should I be setting my idle rate? Now, if you ask 100 different Moto Gymkhana riders, they're going to give you 100 different opinions. So here's my opinion. First of all, we want to take into consideration our idle speed. Now, what idle speed is this is the speed and the RPM that our motorcycle is sitting at when we're moving along with the clutch all the way out and the throttle closed. So once again, let's go ahead and imagine that we're on the motorcycle. I'm in second gear. That's the gear that I ride in. I've got the clutch all the way out. Throttle is off. The bike is just pulling me along. What am I feeling from the motorcycle? Is it pulling me along smoothly? Good. Is it pulling me along and it's kind of lurching back and forth and lugging a little bit? Then in that case, I'm going to stop. I'm going to raise the idle rate. I'm going to ease out the clutch, no throttle. What is my idle speed? Where are the RPMs sitting at now? And what am I feeling from the bike? Is it smoother now? Is it still not smooth enough? Okay, stop again, raise it a little bit more. Keep trying until the bike is pulling you along at a nice stable speed, nice stable RPM, no lugging of the engine, no chugging back and forth. All right, this is one of the ways that we find our idle rate. And you want to make sure that you're not overdoing it, because in my opinion, if you increase the idle rate too much and your idle speed is too great, when you're going to make a tight U-turn around a cone, you're going to have to be really aggressive with the brakes, especially the rear brake, and this can cause your rear brake to start to overheat. So in my style of riding, I don't like to be overly aggressive with the brakes. I want an idle speed and an idle rate that's going to allow me to comfortably get around a cone without lugging, but without being too aggressive with the rear brake. Another thing that I take into consideration are full rotation turns. So another thing I'll do to experiment is I'll start riding a full rotation turn. Now, in a full rotation turn, I like to maintain my line by having just a little bit of maintenance throttle on, just a little bit, and I use light amounts of rear brake to hold my line around a full rotation turn. If the idle rate and the idle speed is not high enough, then I'm going to have to keep increasing throttle more and more to keep myself from falling over in the rotation turn. But if my idle rate and idle speed is too high, then I'm going to have to be really aggressive once again with that rear brake to hold my line. It's going to cause overheating issues. So once again, in a full rotation turn, we just want a little bit of maintenance throttle with a little bit of rear brake to hold our line. That's another way to help find your idle rate and idle speed. Now, a few other things to note about idle rate is that we can tune the feeling of the throttle when we're transitioning between on and off the throttle with our idle rate. If that transition is a little bit abrupt and jerky, try raising the idle rate a little bit. It's going to smooth out the transition. It's going to be buttery smooth. And another thing that we can tune with our idle rate is our engine braking. Many motorcycles right off the bat have very smooth and very, enjoyable engine braking. Other motorcycles have very abrupt and sudden engine braking. That's not good for Moto Gymkhana. So when we increase the idle rate a little bit, this is going to smooth out the engine braking, make it a little bit lighter. And you're going to be really happy with how your throttle and engine braking feels when you get the idle rate just right. Now, once again, riders, we want to keep in mind where our power band is on our specific motorcycle in the gear that we plan on using. And remember that it's going to be different for every motorcycle. If you're on a motorcycle that's a little torquier with low end power, you're probably not going to have to raise the idle as much as someone on a sport bike or a super sport bike where the power band is higher in the rev range. If you're on a sport bike, you're probably going to have to raise that idle rate up a little bit higher relatively. Now, a few examples from my experience. On my Kawasaki Ninja 300 that I had in the past, I was using clutchless style. And so the stock idle rate was at about 1,800 RPM. For Moto Gymkhana, I was riding at about 3,000 RPM for competition. For practice, I was keeping it at about 2,500 RPM. For competition, 3,000. Now, on my current Moto Gymkhana bike, the KLX 300 Supermoto, I am not riding clutchless style. I'm actually riding clutch style. And so having a high idle rate is not really that important. I'm keeping it at about stock, maybe just a little bit higher, between 1,800 RPM and 2,000 RPM. On my R1200 GS, like I mentioned before, no adjustment is possible. So if I'm in first gear, I could ride clutchless. If I'm in second gear, I use the clutch because the RPMs drop a little too much. So sometimes you have to adjust your technique for whatever style of bike you're riding. Now, as I said in the beginning of the video, adjusting idle rate is just one of the adjustments that we can make to help with the way that our engine delivers power. Personally, I like to just raise the idle rate a little bit for Moto Gymkhana, and the rest of the adjustment I make with gearing, which is going to be the topic of the next video. So I will see you there. Until then, riders, arigato and peace.